Hansel and Gretel. Hansel and Gretel lived with their father, who was a woodcutter, in a little hut at the edge of a forest. For a long time they were very happy. They would go off with their father in the early morning and stay near him while he worked. The two children collected berries and nuts and mushrooms, or picked bunches of wild flowers. Gretel was clever at weaving, and she made little baskets from dried grasses. But all this was changed when their father married again, for their stepmother was cruel, and thought nothing the children did was right. She was a greedy woman too, and began to complain and to say there was not enough food, and that the children must go. One night, as he lay awake in his little bed, Hansel heard his father sadly agree to take the children into the forest and lose them. Hansel waited until the very early morning, and then, before the others were awake, he crept out of the little hut and filled his pockets with small white pebbles. That day, when they were deep in the forest, the father said, "You must wait here until I come back." The children waited until it grew dark and cold, and at last Gretel said, "He must have forgotten all about us." Then Hansel told her of all that his stepmother had said. "But never mind," said Hansel, "I have left a trail of little white pebbles along the way we came, and as soon as the moon is up we shall be able to find our way home." When the horrid stepmother opened the door of the hut, there were the two children, waiting to come in. She smiled and pretended to be pleased to see them, and only scolded them for straying away from their father. The next night Hansel heard again his father agree to take the children with him, and to lose them. "Take them deeper into the wood this time," scolded the woman. "We cannot go on feeding them forever. They must find their own way in the world." Sadly, the father did as he had promised, and they walked until the two children were weary and could go no farther. Then the father made a splendid bonfire, and the children lay down under a tree and were soon fast asleep. When they awoke, the fire was out, and the man was already miles away. "Never mind," said Hansel, "we shall be able to find our way, for although the door was locked and I could not go out to collect pebbles, I had some crusts in my pocket, and I have made a trail with them." It was already early morning, and the two children set off hand in hand. But there were no crumbs left, for the birds had flown down and eaten them. Gretel began to cry. But Hansel said, "Look, Gretel, do you see the smoke rising above those trees? There must be a woodman's hut there. We will go and ask for food." The children followed the direction of the smoke, and presently found themselves in a little clearing, and there stood a dear little house. Hansel and Gretel ran up to it, and were just going to knock when they saw that the door was made of chocolate. "We need not be hungry any more," said Gretel. "Look," said Hansel, "the walls of the house are made of gingerbread, and the window frames are barley sugar." And both the children burst out laughing. Out popped a little old woman from the door. "What jolly children," she said. "Come in, my dears. There are more good things inside." Happily, Hansel and Gretel followed her into the little house. The old woman set the table and gave them a good meal. She seemed to have a store of everything children like in her cupboards, and after they had eaten, the old woman led them upstairs into a pretty bedroom and said, "You shall rest here, my dears, and when you are ready we will have another meal." After a few days of such kindness and such good food, Hansel and Gretel began to grow quite plump. One morning Gretel woke to find that Hansel's bed was empty. "Where is my brother?" she asked the old woman. "Get on with your work. I want a great heap of firewood, for I must make the oven nice and hot," said the old woman. When Gretel went outside the cottage, she heard Hansel crying, and looking around, she found him tied up in the hen house. She told Hansel that the old woman had given orders for the oven to be made ready. Hansel said to his sister, "You must help the old woman. Do not say you have found me, but do as she asks." Then Gretel bent down in case the old woman was somewhere nearby, and Hansel told her what to do. Gretel ran off, and all day long she collected wood. Every now and then she would say to the old woman, "I do wonder where Hansel can have got to." And the old woman would chuckle as if she had a splendid secret, but she did not reply. Towards evening, when Gretel was almost too tired to work any longer, and the fire was so strong and bright that the heat in the little kitchen was unbearable, the old woman said, "Good, it is hot enough now. The oven is ready." "Are you going to roast a goose?" asked Gretel. "Yes, my dear, a nice plump little goose," laughed the old woman. "But surely," said Gretel, "you never mean to put a goose in the oven without finding out first whether the heat is too little or too much. You might scorch it, and then your supper would be spoilt." Said the old woman. "It is quite a clever child. I should never have thought of that." And she opened the oven door and popped her head inside, just to see whether or not it was the right heat. Quick as lightning, Gretel seized the old woman, and with one tremendous heave she thrust her inside the oven and slammed the door. Then she ran out to Hansel and set him free. "Let us run into the wood and hide," said Hansel. "But we cannot leave the old woman in the oven," said Gretel. "She is cruel like a bad witch," said Hansel. But Gretel led him back to the kitchen, where the old woman was crying and begging to be let out. "Will you be good for always and always?" asked Gretel. "I will be good for always and always," said the old woman. "Will you never be unkind to any child who may knock on the door?" asked Hansel. "Never, never, never," sobbed the old woman. "Then if I may have your magic stick, you shall come out," asked Hansel. "Take it," said the old woman. "It is behind the door. The stick will obey you always, and it will turn all that it touches into nice things to eat. Toffee or sponge cake, gingerbread or chocolate, just as you wish." So Gretel unlatched the oven door, and Hansel helped the old woman out. And after that she was no trouble. Sometimes Hansel would say to the stick, "Fetch my father here," and the stick would run out, and almost at once the woodcutter would knock on the door and say, "Do Hansel and Gretel live in this little house?" Then they would have a lovely day together. But of course neither Hansel nor Gretel ever invited the stepmother.